Welcome to this episode of the Feminist Buzzkills podcast. I'm Liz Winstead, and I am joined by my co-host, the one and only Moji Alawode-El.
Hey, y'all. This week marks the 4th anniversary of the death of our federally protected right to abortion, so I really shouldn't sound so happy.
The pew-pews kind of make it, though, somehow.
Well, we couldn't think of a better guest than repo journalist for The Nation and author Amy Littlefield.
Amy's new book, Killers of Roe, is an incredible history and an amazing read that dives into some of the creepy and colorful collaborators. Do you like that? Creepy,
I love it.
Colorful.
I love an alliteration. Alliteration is my favorite thing in the world, as you know that about me.
It's true. The creepy, colorful collaborators who are the unsung shitbags of the demise of Roe. Fuck them all.
But that's a perfect segue to tell you about a new campaign that we at AAF are working on. As we all know, one of the fallouts of the fall of Roe is now the march towards a total abortion ban. So in recent months, we've watched one step towards that. Louisiana and the Fifth Circuit Court are pushing to ban sending abortion pills in the mail.
That's right. And in addition to that, powerful anti-abortion forces are carpet bombing state legislatures, Congress, and the FDA with debunked junk science studies and made-up data, trying to convince them to not just ban mailing pills, but to ban mifepristone outright and just yank it off the market.
Which is so dumb. They should not be speaking for us, and especially they should not be speaking for people who have thrived because they were able to use Miffy. So, in order to make a big splash, in order to counter this bullshit, we are working with some of the most incredible partners in the reproductive health and justice movement. And together we're collecting thousands of medication abortion stories. And if you have one, we want you to share it at miffystories.com.
We're asking anyone who feels comfortable who has used Miffy through the past 26 years it's been on the market to share their experience. At miffystories.com, you can anonymously submit your story in a simple form that we've created to make it easy to share your truth.
It won't take you hours. You can do it in minutes. And our goal is to deliver to the FDA, to every politician they're targeting, real life experiences from people who have had medication abortions to drown out all the misinformation that they're being hit with. We've already gotten some pretty amazing, pretty beautiful stories. And we've decided that, listen, every week during this campaign, we should just read one of them on the pod. So this week we are featuring Claire. Liz, you want to start this one off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Claire, and I had a medication abortion in California in 2021. I found out I was pregnant when I turned 30 on a trip with my best friend far from home in a foreign country. And my first thought was, how is this possible? I'm so calculated. I used protection. I did everything right. Why is this happening? How could I possibly know what to do? I want to have a family, but not like this, not right now, not with some guy I don't really know after a one-night stand that was just supposed to be fun. Why won't he ever carry the weight that I now bear in my body? I decided to have a medication abortion because I wasn't in the position to have a child. I had no solid job or home, and it wasn't the time to bring a child into my turbulent transition of a time.
I received my abortion pills at a clinic. From start to finish, the process was terrifying, empowering, spiritual, and sadly, took the pills at a hotel I will never stay at again with my best friend there by my side, and I felt horrific. I purged absolutely everything in my body. It was scary and sad, but also on my terms in the privacy of my own choice. What surprised me the most was the self-respect and faith I gained in myself. I told myself I didn't do anything wrong, and after a lifetime of feeling like the problem, I was set free and finally believed that.
Because I had access to medication abortion, I was able to land on my own 2 feet. I got a career of a lifetime in the arts shortly after. I bought my home in LA. I created the foundation I wanted for a family, but it just wasn't the right time at that time. I felt stronger than I ever knew I could be.
I'm sharing my story because Planned Parenthood saved my life. It's been radical to have an abortion during a time when we are going back in time as Americans and losing privileges that our grandmothers fought for. I've been afraid to talk about this because it's painful and deeply personal, but I'm grateful for the place to pour this experience out. I hope sharing this helps normalize how abortions are healthcare and a basic human right.
Medication abortion is life-changing, so necessary and normal. 1 in 3 women have abortions. Both my mom and stepmom had abortions, and I only found that out while having mine. This is something we need to talk about, even when being pregnant at the wrong time can feel too heavy to bear. No one wants to play God or make that decision, but I am grateful every day for the freedom that I had to trust myself and choose. I love that, the honesty in that, the pain.
Medication abortion gave her freedom, gave her a life that she seems really happy with right now. It kind of made me want to tear up a little bit when I was reading it.
Same, I just feel like everybody's choice to do this. It's complicated. It can be challenging. You get to have a whole bunch of feelings around it and still understand it's the best decision for you. And I feel like that is why it's nobody else's decision.
One of the gifts of working somewhere like Abortion Access Front is when you talk about your abortion stories and when you talk to people about abortion, like this woman did with her stepmother and her mother, you actually find the ways we are connected. And I just feel like this project globalizes it, really makes it much bigger than even the people in your immediate circle.
That's right. And, if you were touched by the stories or you've been hearing us reading them on the pod and you've got a story of your own, hopefully these are catalysts to have you head over to miffystories.com and just read more of these stories, see what's come in, and then submit your own. Look, the submission form is easy. The prompts are easy. We won't collect your data. You can do it totally anonymously. It's just an incredible way to help other people feel supported and to be able to tell those making decisions about how we're going to have abortions that they should be looking at and centering the people who've used these medications.
I was going to say to tell them to go fuck themselves, but I like what you said better. That's better. That's nicer. That's much nicer.
I feel like that's right. I feel like this is a good time to move on because we're having this fight because why? Roe v. Wade collapsed 4 years ago. We wouldn't be fighting about medication abortion and access to it if we had some kind of federal protections, but I digress.
And on this podcast, we have done our very best to navigate this horrible reproductive road trip that decision has created.
For sure. We followed the bans, the creeps behind the bans, the consequences of the bans, the fake science behind the bans, the schemes. And yes, those few wins, we have covered those too. I mean, we thought we had covered all of it.
Listen, I felt like an expert on this subject, and I still do. But then we read Killers of Roe, which is a new book from journalist Amy Littlefield, and that revealed some eye-opening history and mystery of exactly who set the groundwork for overturning Roe. My mind was blown.
Same here. And she brought up some old chestnuts that I remember, literally, like men that I had thought were good men and then ended up hating. She brought some up that I knew, and then some new villains who we need to make famous, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no more perfect week to talk about this book and break down the history of the bullshit that set us up for the destruction of our federally protected reproductive rights. So please welcome to the podcast the reproductive rights reporter for The Nation magazine and author of Killers of Roe, Amy Littlefield. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Moji. Hi, Liz. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you for coming.
We're so glad you're here because we literally thought, what is the new angle? What is the new thing that we can hear about? And then enter our hero, Amy Littlefield, who has went into the dregs of humanity,
literally,
to dive into the history of how Roe betrayed us and literally sat face to face with the garbage people who changed our lives forever. So thank you for coming and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. I did this for you. I did sit through some pretty unpleasant conversations with some pretty tough characters and watch them eat some pretty gross meals. And it was all so that I could tell you about it.
We're going to talk about that eating with people you despise in a moment, but I think for our listeners, that's third base. So maybe we should back up a little bit.
Start with dinner. We should start with start with coffee.
Let's get a little laying out of the land.
I wanted to jump in and like your book is incredible.
Thank
I want
you
to tell us like what would surprise people about the state of abortion right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if someone's just tuning in from like an alien planet, right, and they don't know anything about the state of abortion right now, I think what's going to most fascinate them is that abortions are up since the Dobbs decision, and that increase is part of what I think is like a decentralization that's happening in the abortion rights movement right now, right? Where for a long time, the pro-choice movement was Planned Parenthood and then NARAL, and it was led by these big groups, and it was mostly geared towards defending Roe v. Wade in court, right? And that has shifted in the wake of the Dobbs decision. I think we're seeing, Black women, groups that were on the margins, groups that were funding abortions, always knew the courts were not going to save us, right? And I think it's very hard to argue the courts are going to save us when they just overturned Roe v. Wade. And so I think what we're seeing is this decentralization where people with ideas that are more further to the left, ideas that are outside the box, are coming to the forefront. And that's where these shield laws that are allowing clinicians to mail abortion pills into red states from blue states came from, right? This didn't come from Planned Parenthood. This didn't come from the Supreme Court, right? This came from legal scholars and clinicians thinking outside the box. And so I think that's a testament to these shifts that we're seeing in the balance of power in the abortion rights movement right now. I think that's pretty surprising to me.
And I also think, to your point, the organizations that have really led this are the ones that we should really be looking to, who actually trust us to make decisions and who are actually people who understand that, yes, you can indeed take medication abortion in your home and self-manage it, and it's safe. And your book also is a big message to reevaluate how fear has served not only the antis, but our side as well. And I think that we've done a disservice with the fear because it's just taken away our power in a way that these new groups are saying, fuck that shit.
Yeah. And they're following the example of international feminists who have been deploying these methods and passing these pills around hand to hand, person to person for years.
Yeah.
And borrowing from states where abortion criminalization was the norm and there wasn't a reliance on the courts. And yeah, so I think that's been a really important shift, especially for me as having spent years, looking into the archives and decades of figuring out how the pro-choice movement was developing its strategy, so centered around the courts for many years. It's really interesting to see that shift happening.
Yeah. And even the amount that we talk about mifepristone because of its profound presence in abortion care now, we know that, over 60% of all abortions that happen in the US are done with mifepristone. And now we're watching how anti-abortion zealots are big fucking mad that Trump is not moving on it.
They're so mad.
This is one of the first times our movement is actually ahead of them, because I feel like they have since Roe been really pushing the envelope. And this feels like one of the first times we were like, no, what about pills? They hadn't even thought about it.
What about pills? Pretty hard to stop. Yeah, I mean, that is I'm all about a good news story. And the good news I'm here to tell you after several years spent sitting with anti-abortion folks and having in-depth conversations with them is they are so mad and they really feel like they have lost. They defeated Roe v. Wade and abortions are up. And so, the danger there, obviously, we can take some satisfaction in knowing that they are so mad and they've got a Republican in the White House and it's still not being stopped. But then the flip side of that, right, is that's going to get really dangerous because now the debate that's dividing the anti-abortion movement is around when exactly we should admit that our plan was to criminalize women and lock them up all along, right? Because if 2/3 of abortions involve someone just taking medication abortion at home alone in their bathroom, at what point are you going to admit that you can't stop that, especially when the pills are coming from international sources or they're coming from a community activist in that person's neighborhood? You're not going to be able to stop that unless you're going to admit that, you want to go after the person who's actually taking those pills. And we're starting to see that idea kind of becoming mainstream in the anti-abortion movement now.
Can I also just add to that? When you look at, as we are finding, and it's just, again, I can't say it enough, it's a wonder that we as women can wake up every day and not just, and function in the world, and how aggressively hostile men are to women and how they want to harm us. And I really think they are so pissed off also that they can't protest outside of our bedrooms.
Yeah.
They just fucked it up, man. By closing those clinics down, they cannot get their kink on of shaming us in public outside of clinics.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is what is making them the most mad.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's where we're seeing these like spectacularly absurd, but also kind of scary ideas like the catch kits, right? The catch kits,
Yes.
this is this idea that you're gonna have to have a kit to catch, your blood and tissue, right?
An abortion colander.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody should have one.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about your book. Let's get to it.
Yes.
The title is Killers of Roe, and I just want to know, why'd you call it that?
Yeah. I mean, partly, obviously, it's that I wanted to flip the script a little bit, right? I used to work in a clinic many years ago. I got called a murderer on my way to work in the morning. And I was looking at the preventable deaths of women from abortion bans. And so I wanted to flip the script a little bit and say, all right, you guys have been calling us murderers for years for supporting abortion rights. What do you call somebody who promotes a policy that kills a woman? You know? And also, there was a death of a different kind that I was studying here, right? Not just the preventable deaths of women from abortion bans, but the death of a fundamental human right, the death of the constitutional right to abortion in this country. And it felt like a moment to hit pause, talk to everybody I could who was there, and try to render an account of like, how the heck did this happen? How did we get here, right? How do we lose a constitutional right that is supported by a robust majority of Americans? Like, how did that happen? And I wanted to talk to people on the pro-choice side, and I wanted to talk to the anti-abortion folks who you might not have heard of, right? The less famous people, the grassroots people, and ask them what they did, how this happened. And so it felt like a parallel could be drawn to the murder mysteries that I love. Okay, I'm a total murder mystery buff. And after I had my first kid, murder mysteries were really the only thing that I could read because my brain was like fried and anxious. And it was a pandemic. And like I was already at the end of my rope. And then Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen now. I've been studying the anti-abortion movement for years, and this is what's going to, and it happened. And those two things melded in my mind, and this became a murder mystery to uncover the death of a constitutional right, but also the very real deaths of very real women that resulted from these anti-abortion policies.
Amy, Moji, and I were calling you Miso Marples.
Oh my God. Oh my God, that's so good.
I love the detective framing. I don't read detective novels that much because I can't deal with the suspense. I spent my postpartum watching Dr. Pimple Popper, so we have different uses of our time.
Yeah, same.
But I love that framing. I thought it was so good and really, I feel like it got to like the meat of exactly what was happening, right? These mostly guys, in fact, just did a whole heist on our fundamental human rights.
Yeah, they did. My tagline for this murder mystery, which admittedly might not sell as many copies as Agatha Christie, but let me try it out on you, is that this is 50 years of women dying preventable deaths at the hands of men who believe they had a direct line to God himself. Okay, it's I'm not sure.
Like we could punch that up a little bit.
Yeah, kind of long. Not sure the character count
good
is
bones.
I think Miso Marple might get us there. I think Miso Marple. I think I need to go leave so I can put that on a bumper sticker right now.
The Miso Marple Mysteries.
Miso Marple Mysteries. Take it. It's yours. All right. So let's talk about some of these killers because there are some of them that I know people don't remember, but like I'm old enough, and I'm going to bring up Bob Packwood first because I'm old enough to remember when Bob Packwood was. He's like the OG Me Too guy, and he was from Oregon, and he was a Republican, but he was pro-choice, and he kept getting all these awards from like women's organizations, and I think I would not be surprised. Also, I don't know this for a fact, if establishment feminists didn't know what was going on and protected his ass anyway, the way they did with Bill Clinton and every other fucking stupid man, because this is all we deserve. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Bob Packwood and you going to talk to Bob Packwood and his role in all of this.
Yes, thank you for asking about Bob Packwood, one of my favorite characters in this book. And, again, with the murder mystery theme here, the essence of the murder mystery, okay, and with my Miso Marple hat here, or my Miso Marple, like, pearls, I guess it should be, and knitting, is, like, it's about complicated characters. It's about everybody has these complex motives, this, like, intricacy to their internal lives that you would, like, never know about until you start digging, right?
He was like the OG Eric Swalwell.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Right. So you have this super pro-choice, super environmentalist, kind of left-leaning guy, but Republican, right? coming out of Oregon, and he introduces some of the earliest policies to legalize abortion, right? He's talking about that in 1970, and he's trying to sell the idea to Republicans. Now, he is dabbling in population control, okay?
Just to dabble.
There's always a side of racism. There's always a side.
Yeah, there's always, I mean, that was very much in that era. But he's also like at times sounding really like an intersectional feminist, right? And certainly fighting back against the Hyde Amendment, the ban on federal funding of abortion that cut off access to most Medicaid recipients. He was one of the most vociferous opponents of that legislation and tried really hard to stop it in his tracks. And he literally got the Good Guy Award, right, from women's groups. Like, this man was a champion. Gloria Steinem raised money for him, and I talked to a woman who had joined his campaign because she saw it as this feminist thing that she could do in her home state of Oregon. And then what happened? He would turn around and sexually harass. It seems like just about every woman who came into his office.
It literally seemed like all you needed was a heartbeat.
Yeah, if you walked by him.
That was the intersection for him, just harassing every woman.
Yeah, the hotel clerk, the journalist who came to talk to him about abortion, the lobbyist, the every woman who crossed, I mean, close to 50 women in the end would come forward and accuse Bob Packwood of sexual misconduct of some kind. And what was amazing about him is he had recorded it, like voice transcript. And then this poor secretary of his had to type it all up, right? Including like graphic descriptions of his own sexual misconduct, which then the Senate got hold of when they were investigating him, right? And ultimately, there's a scandal and disgrace in early 1990s, which folks who were, politically conscious at that time might remember. But so what was amazing is that I got in touch with his wife, who was his former chief of staff, who became his wife.
Did she leave him?
His original wife, he was divorced from his first wife and married his chief of staff, Elaine. And they are still together. He's in his 90s. I flew out to Oregon to meet him. And what was amazing is that Elaine, when I told her that I was researching the Hyde Amendment and I wanted to, and Packwood was a hero when it came to the Hyde Amendment, she gave me access to all of these entries in his diary where he talked about the Hyde Amendment and where he talked about, his championing of women's rights. And so I got access into his very complicated motives as well.
He probably wanted all of his mistresses to be able to have abortions. Like, honestly, what the fuck? I mean, it's so weird. You can never trust men who are too overly supportive. It's just always a red flag to me. Ugh.
And to me, some Marple too.
Yes. So how did you like the Bob Packwood story is so indicative of having multiple feelings, and then ultimately, can we even call Bob Packwood an ally or a friend or whatever if he was just Rapey McGee at the end of the day? Like, how do you rectify that?
The thing is, there were no perfect characters in this history, right?
Right.
And like, I had a very funny conversation with my kid about this, right? Where my kid was like, "Who's this on the cover of this book, Mommy?" And I was like, "Oh, that's Bob Packwood. How do I explain that to a small child?" And what I landed on is like, people are complicated, which is like, some are more complicated than others. Okay, let's be honest here. But there was nobody in this history who like passed with flying colors, right? Who you could look at and be like, this person was flawless and did everything great. Because if there had been, like, we'd probably still have Roe v. Wade. We probably have like full federal funding of abortion. We'd probably have like a repeal of parental consent laws. Like, we'd be in a very different place. We'd have, a reality where we don't have forced sterilization and immigrant detention. We'd have, a very different outlook, right? If everybody had been perfect, and they weren't, right? The pro-choice white feminists who made decisions about, hey, we need to move on from the Hyde Amendment and we need to start fighting the idea of a nationwide abortion ban through a constitutional amendment, like, they're not blameless either, right? The folks who thought Rosie Jimenez wasn't a sympathetic enough character after she died as a result of the Hyde Amendment because she was an unmarried Latina and this was her third abortion, and, was one death really enough? The folks who put forward those points of view, many of whom were involved in pro-choice politics, right? Like,
I started this organization because of, I was doing some fundraisers for organizations, Planned Parenthoods, who were like, oh, when you tell your abortion story, like, can you not say abortion? And it was like, what? I could feel the institutional push of it's too much to even say the word. And it's like the anti-abortion movement says abortion 5 times more than we do.
Yeah.
And they're not legislating a choice. They're
Yeah.
legislating an abortion, you know? And so the selling out of people and the judgment and the whole like good abortion, bad abortion framing,
Mhm.
it's still lingering out there. It's changed a lot because advocacy groups have taken up the mantle and done a lot of reframing, but I sure feel like I still see people saying we shouldn't celebrate abortion or you shouldn't have this many abortions for birth control. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, unpack that for me.
Mhm.
Abortion doesn't change your fertility or anything else. It's just hard to get and inaccessible. But, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd have that fight.
Yeah, one of the fascinating histories that I researched and tell in the book is the history of the sort of choice framing within the pro-choice movement, right? And how it grew out of this strategy for NARAL in the 1980s that was sort of about like riding the wave of Reaganism, right? Like we're going to take this idea of like families should get to choose for themselves and who decides, like it should be an individual decision. And and the reality is that that's sort of like everything comes back to Ronald Reagan somehow.
Always.
Oh,
Everything
always.
bad is just a
It's like-
direct line.
But that logic could be weaponized to argue against public funding, right? If we need to get the government out of personal decision making, including on abortion, that messaging might win over some conservatives or some middle of the road people. But then what happens when you say, and the government should pay for it so that poor people can actually afford it?
Right.
That argument comes back to bite you.
Yeah. And I also think, too, in all of that kind of framing, it really puts this undesirable onus on the thing entirely. We gave so much ammunition to the anti abortion side by trying to think that we could have language or we could appease them by saying things like safe, legal, and rare, or, people shouldn't have abortions for birth control, or just don't say abortion at all, because
I was going to say, or just not saying the word.
yeah, because they would say, if you can't say it, what's your problem with it?
Right. And Democrats for sure couldn't say it for many years, right? And this is one of the issues when I look at the 50-year history of like how the heck we got here, right? One of the issues is that Democrats were never as robust in their support for abortion rights as Republicans were in their strategic use of abortion to rally up their own base, right? And so they were much more aggressive in attacking it. And so the abortion rights movement frequently has been divided over basically one question, which is like, how do we handle the fact that Democrats are softer in their support than we would like them to be, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at like different debates where that came up in the 1990s until today, right? But it's been a matter of the fact that, the believers and the opportunists on the Republican side of the aisle have fused this really strong alliance where everybody was able to benefit politically, ideologically, religiously from coming together financially, from coming together to take down this fundamental right.
And it continues, right? You still see it. Democrats still are really, a lot, except for the younger and more progressive, are really hesitant or like a little dance around the word abortion. Actually dance around all the progressive rights I fight for. I know we talked a little bit about how, not even a little bit, a lot about how there were no good actors. One of the things I found interesting also were the links between, this dichotomy of like leading in anti-abortion advocacy, but also like their racism and their classism, right? I think that when you so brilliantly in the book just said like taxpayers were essentially a stooge for white educated men and everybody else were the people who benefited from these taxpayers, even though we are taxpayers. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Right. And this is why the Hyde Amendment was like my Rosetta Stone for understanding all of this, right? This is the policy that bans federal funding of abortion, puts it off limits for most people on Medicaid, starting right after Roe, starting in 1976, right? And I tracked down the like guys you've never heard of who were actually responsible for that ban. It was not Henry Hyde's idea. Read the book to find out more about that. But yeah, I mean, the reason the Hyde Amendment was so successful, the reason it has been renewed by every Congress, Democrat or Republican to this day, the reason why it has outlasted Roe v. Wade is because it taps into this fundamental American idea, which is that taxpayers, code for white men, white Christian men, right, should not have to pay for the basic things that women of color need. right?
Mhm.
That's what that word means. And it came up time and time again. And so by making this argument, well, however you feel about abortion, I think we can all agree taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for it. Right? What does that actually mean? It means poor people shouldn't have access to abortion, but our daughters will always be able to get one, right?
It's like Reaganism. It goes over, and I think it continues, right? Like we don't have Roe, but it still continues about a lot of other things that we should have. Oh, taxpayers shouldn't pay for people's health care, like other health care that isn't abortion, taxpayers. And it's all just like white men shouldn't pay for the rest of us to have
Yes.
shit.
Yes.
That's all it
Yes.
is.
That's it. That's it. And that same language was used to justify sterilization of women of color, right? Because if this baby is going to end up on welfare, then my taxpayer dollars shouldn't have to go. So this is not a pro-life argument, right? This is wielded to defend the rights of white male, property owners, and wielded by a particular group with a particular religious point of view around abortion as needed.
I might even argue to say, again, going back to my wild and prolific embrace of misandry.
This is the Misandrous podcast, in case you didn't know, Amy. This is who Liz and I are in this moment.
Full in, full in. But just watching how much and how many men that are across parties are part of the manosphere. There are Democrats in the manosphere. How if 62 million men hit up a website in the month of February that was learning how to drug and rape their wife, I think that crosses party lines. I think that, and that there's an article in the Atlantic earlier this month just about how the largest common bond of men is to destroy feminism and get women back to a place that they're manageable. And I'm not saying that Democratic men are as profoundly obsessed with doing that as Christian nationalists are and as this other movement is, but I'm saying their lack of interest or lack of commitment to the full humanity of women makes them, at the very least, accomplices.
Yes.
We talked about Packwood. We've held our side responsible. But within the book, Amy, there is one man who, for me, just stands above the others in full creepiness. And it's a person who I don't think very many people know his name.
I'd never heard it before.
I'd never heard of him. And it is like the digging and the unearthing who he is and his profound role in anti-abortion movement and getting the Hyde Amendment going is a guy named Bob Bauman. Will you talk about good old Bob?
Yes. So I was so happy to get the opportunity to talk about Bauman because he is emblematic of so many of the contradictions and complexities in this history. So he was a congressman from Maryland who was devoutly Catholic, was anti-abortion, had a really sad and lonely childhood, right? He himself was adopted and he was gay and closeted. He'd gotten married, he'd had a large family. And one of the many contradictions in his life actually is that he was perhaps one of the most conservative members of Congress and a devout fiscal conservative. And yet he lived way beyond his means and, had a house he couldn't afford, sent his kids to private school, like was borrowing money from William F. Buckley Jr., the father of fiscal conservatism himself, at one point had to bail the family out. And so he was, putting forward anti-abortion policies and conservative policies in Congress. And then after hours, he was cruising the streets of Washington, D.C. in a Lincoln Continental with congressional plates, picking up men and paying them for sex.
Seems like a bad plan.
Yeah, it was a bad plan because what happened is the FBI caught wind of it and confronted him about it. And his career fizzled out right on the cusp of Reagan's ascendance in 1980.
So, Amy, was he liked? Was he like a guy they liked? Was he?
So this is the sad thing about Bob Bauman, right? He was this stocky, spectacled. He's still alive, so he is this stocky, spectacled, nerdy guy who had spent his lonely years in congressional page school, studying congressional procedure. And so he had this way of wielding procedural rules to try to gum things up in Congress in ways that probably feel like completely normal today because Congress doesn't really seem to do anything anymore. So he was grotesquely unpopular. And he knew this, right? And the Democrats who had the majority in Congress at the time that the Hyde Amendment was proposed used to just vote against anything that had his name on it, kind of reflexively. And so he proposed a version of the Hyde Amendment, the ban on federal funding of abortion, in 1975 that didn't go anywhere. So what did he do? He went up to his pal, Henry Hyde. And Henry Hyde was this super charming guy. Bob Bauman mentioned that Henry was really tall. He was also a devout Catholic, also opposed abortion.
Also having affairs.
I mean, I feel like there's a pattern here. I don't know. But he said to Henry, like, hey, you're a popular, charming guy. Why don't you propose this policy? And maybe, we'll get some Democrats on board. Maybe we'll get this thing through. And, meanwhile, it's the 1976, the election's coming up. Evangelicals are kind of getting into the mix. Abortion's becoming this hot political topic. And it worked. And they got it through as a rider to an appropriations bill. And it's been renewed every year since. And so I talked to Bob Bauman. I had a really interesting conversation with him. Really complicated guy. He had written all the gory details of his life down in an autobiography called The Gentleman from Maryland that is long out of print, I believe. I was able to get a copy used online. And he writes in the beginning of that book, I didn't want to write this book. I wrote it because I needed the money.
These are like super posters. These are basically Truth Social guys, but like in the 70s. Like, why are they writing all of their shit down? That's crazy.
Did he ever find a nice young man and settle down?
I mean, I hope so. I hope that for him. I was only able to talk to him once before he stopped responding to me. And so I didn't get to ask about his romantic life. But, one of the contradictions I asked him about is like, he's found a way to be Catholic and okay with his own homosexuality. But what about women who have abortions? He's still very adamantly against abortion, called me pro-death or something like that when I reached out to him. And so, we had a very interesting phone conversation.
They always do. Henry Hyde, let's not forget, Henry Hyde was leading the Clinton impeachment hearings and then unearthed a picture of Henry Hyde and his mistress where she is on his lap.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Liz, and Moji, one of my favorite, like way late to the game Me Too scoops in this book is that I talked to this woman who worked in Congress who was like, yeah, Henry Hyde used to grab women's butts. And I was like, what? Like, this was not in his obituary. What do you mean? She was like, yeah, he used to just like grab your ass.
And then women had figured out how to negotiate around his ass grabbing.
Yes.
Henry, grab your hide. What the hell?
Really interesting about your book to me is that all of these things, now that they've sort of killed Roe, all of these things that are coming that seem more and more extreme, like life begins at fertilization, seem like new ideas. And then reading your book, I was like, wait, they were there in the gestation. They just hid them. They tucked them under the rug. And now that they've like killed the Roe, they're just pulling out these old chestnuts. And that's crazy.
Yes, that was always part. Contraception too, right? People are like, oh no, now they're coming for contraception. It's like, no. That was always part of the plan.
Always there. It was always there. And they just hid it. I want to know, because these were like gems for me, especially like in the work that I do. Is there anything when you were writing this book and when you were finished and you submitted it to your editor and they were like, yeah, we can't keep this. And you're like, but it's so good. And they were like, I'm so sorry, we can't keep this. Like, can you just tell us something that you either like regret leaving or just you lost the fight because it just couldn't fit?
I mean, I would say like my biggest regret is like, there's been so much that's happened since the book came out, right? Where I'm like, I wish I could have gotten in like the abortion abolitionists, right? The people who are out there being like, women should have the death penalty for abortion.
Oh, we know them.
Good old Jason Storms.
Your friends, Liz's friend.
So what words of wisdom do you have now that this book is out and you're telling people, sort of this history? What words can you give people, knowing what you know, or tools that would help us not make the mistakes that led us here?
Yeah, a couple things. One is know your enemy, right? I think on the left, we are sometimes hesitant to spend time with these folks because it's really hard. Like, I get that. But the thing is, they are obsessed with us. Like, the right wing is obsessed with the left because they believe, falsely in my opinion, that we run everything, right? And so they have studied, right? The degree to which they have just tried to copy and paste the civil rights movement's playbook in order to deconstruct the civil rights movement's gains, right? The degree to which they just take feminist rhetoric and then use it to unspool feminism, right, in this shameless way. And they're very good at finding the divisions in our movements and taking advantage of them. And I think we can find those fissures in their movements. We can identify these patterns when we know them as well as they know us. And then I think another part of it is like, one of the later chapters in my book is called The Renegades, and it's about All Above All and the campaign to repeal the Hyde Amendment and how that came from groups that were, not the ones who had the most clout with Democrats, not the ones who were, focused on the legislative or the defensive strategy. This came from groups who were like, the ACA just passed and the Hyde Amendment's still here. And in fact, we have more restrictions on abortion. So YOLO, let's go for it. We're going to touch the third rail. We are going to try to repeal the Hyde Amendment because there seems to be no point in being cautious and careful and relying on the system here. Right. And that campaign hasn't been successful yet. The Hyde Amendment hasn't been repealed, but they did change the conversation in the way that we talk about quote unquote taxpayer funding of abortion. Right. Now we talk about how care shouldn't be dependent on people's zip codes. Right. And they even got Joe Biden to say that. Right. Who had supported the Hyde Amendment for many years. And so I think there are wins that I document in the book that are, different from the sort of conventional wisdom and strategy that guided the pro-choice movement for many years that are worth studying. And that's one of them.
The book is incredible, and it's a history that we need to be reminded of and know, and knowing the mistakes we shouldn't make again. Plus, it's a super fun read. The way
So
that
fun.
you framed it makes it, there's nothing better than feeling like in the know because somebody brought you new information about a new creep. So highly recommend the book. Thank you so much for giving us this really great perspective in a week that's full of, it's the anniversary of the death of Roe. And this is a week where we needed you in this moment. So thank you for being you in this moment for us.
Thank you so much, Liz and Moji. It's great to be with you on this week of all weeks, remembering the death of Roe and also the very real deaths of people as a result of this policy change, which we cannot lose sight of.
Amy, where can people find you and find your book?
Yeah, you can find me on Bluesky under my name, Amy Littlefield. You can find me on Instagram at Little Amyfield. I have a website, amylittlefield.com, and please buy Killers of Roe from your local indie bookseller.
Perfect. Thank you.
That is our show. What an incredible show. Listen, buy Amy's book, Killers of Roe, my investigation into the mysterious death of abortion rights. Anywhere books are sold, go to independent booksellers. You can probably find it on Bookshop. Just go there.
It's really good. I'm so excited for you all to read it. Now, look, if you aren't already a Patreon member, now is the time to do it. We just brought you a whole bunch of shit you didn't know. We made you laugh. We made you think. It's all good. So listen. If you aren't already a member of our Patreon, sign up now. Not only will you get a birthday shout out, maybe, you'll get support, great content, and cool FBK merchant experience. All of the pledges not only support our pod, but they support our activism at Abortion Access Front. So you can pledge patreon.com/feminist buzzkills.
And some of that activism is miffystories.com. So just head over there, give a read, look at the beautiful stories that have already been submitted, and then add your own. And if you don't have a story, talk to someone who has one. Invite someone to just go to the site and read and share maybe the story that they haven't shared with everyone. Anybody can participate if you've encountered Miffy and used it for your abortion or your miscarriage.
And again, our voice is our power, and our truth can help set everyone free. So again, that's miffystories.com.
We're going to miss you because we're off next week on the road doing some clinic support and collecting Miffy stories. But we'll be back the following week with amazing guests.
Look out. We have the hottest author out there right now. I'm not kidding you. Carol Claire Burke is here, author of the New York Times best-selling blockbuster Yesteryear. She's going to talk about her book and all about the tradwifery that's in the book. And we cannot wait because everyone's talking about it and we get to talk to her.
Also, from the National Women's Law Center, senior policy analyst Jackie Wang is here to talk about why they're suing the Trump administration's Department of Veteran Affairs. Hint, it has everything to do with the trash-ass reproductive health policies they are implementing that decimate access to reproductive care.
Such a good show. You're going to need a break from our podcast just to gear up for the energy that's coming for that one. Holy shit. I cannot wait. And finally, time to throw flowers at the path of our production team. The Feminist Buzzkills podcast is edited and produced by Remy DeTournay and Jin Moon for Abortion Access Front.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. And cliche alert, fight like your life depends on it, because it does.
Feminist Buzzkills, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.